The students, in today's video, I will give the page-wise explanation of the 7th chapter of the Hornbill textbook, The Adventure, written by Jayant Narlekar. Now, the story begins with what Professor Gaitonde's mind experienced during the time he lay unconscious after his accident with a truck. When the accident took place, Professor Gaitonde was thinking at that time what course history would have taken if the results of the Battle of Panipat had gone the other way. It means, in the Battle of Panipat, the Afghan ruler Ahmad Shah Abdali had defeated the Marathas. And now Gaitonde was thinking, if the Battle of Panipat had been won by the Marathas and Ahmad Shah Abdali would have been defeated. The journey here is a journey of the mind and not a journey of the train. Now, Professor Gaitonde was traveling from Pune to Bombay, now called Mumbai, by the Jijmata Express. He was familiar with most of the countryside, and there was not much for him to watch outside. His mind turned inward and started planning about what he was going to do in Bombay. He was a historian, so he decided that he would go to a big library and find out how the present state of affairs was reached. He also decided that on his return to Pune, he would have a long talk with Rajendra Deshpande, who could help him understand his findings in a better manner. Now here, Gaitonde's mind shifts into the British period. The train, that's the Jijmata Express, stopped at a small station called Sarhad, and this was the area between the territories of Pune and Bombay. An Anglo-Indian in uniform went through the train checking permits. Now, Professor Gaitonde's mind has now landed in the British Raj because he was now in the British territory of Bombay. He thinks that he is Gangadhar Pant and is talking to another passenger on the train. The name of the passenger is Khan Sahab. Now, Khan Sahab and Professor Gaitonde had a brief conversation. Khan Sahab explained Professor Gaitonde that the place where the permits are being checked is Sarhad, and this is where the British Raj begins. And he also asked him that he presumed that he was going for the first time to Bombay. Professor Gangadhar Pant Gaitonde replied that he was in fact going for the first time, and he asked him how he would go to Peshawar. Khan Sahib replied that the train they were traveling in goes to the Victoria terminus, and he would take the frontier mail that night out of Bombay Central. And from Bombay, he would go to Delhi, then to Lahore, and then Peshawar. It was a long journey, and that he would reach Peshawar the day after the next day. Thereafter, Khan spoke a lot about his business. Gangadhar Pant kept listening with great interest. The train now passed through the suburban areas. The blue carriages carried the letters GBMR on the side. Greater Bombay Metropolitan Railway, explained Khan Sahib. And he also told him to have a look on the tiny Union Jack painted on each carriage. Now, Union Jack is the national flag of the United Kingdom. A gentle reminder that they were in British territory. The train now began to slow down beyond Dadar and stopped only at its destination, that is Victoria Terminus. The station looked remarkably neat and clean. The stop was mostly made of Anglo-Indians and Parsis, along with a handful of British officers. As he came out of the station, Gangadhar Pant found himself facing an attractive building. The letters on it read, East India House, headquarters of the East India Company. Now, there is another mental shift. The sight of the East India Company headquarters startled Gangadhar Pant. Historically, it was known that the East India Company had been wound up after the events of 1857. So how it could be there now? Gangadhar Pant thought that history must have taken a different turn before 1857. He decided to find out when that turn had taken place. But first he went to meet his son, who worked in an office in Bombay. The reader should remember, you should remember that all the action is going on just in Professor Gaitonde's mind. While walking to his son's office, he saw that the buildings were of the Victorian style, and these buildings had in them the shops and offices of the British establishments, Boots and Woolworth departmental stores, and British banks such as Lloyds and Barclays. This was an entirely different Bombay with which Professor Gangadhar Pant Gaitonde was familiar with. And that's why he was very much startled, shocked, surprised, and there was an agitation in his mind. Professor Gangadhar Gaitonde entered the Forbes building and went up to the English receptionist. He asked the receptionist respectfully that he wished to meet Mr. Vinay Gaitonde. Remember that Mr. Vinay Gaitonde was Professor Gangadhar Pant Gaitonde's son. The receptionist searched through the telephone list, the staff list, and then through the directory of employees of all the branches of the firm. She shook her head and said that she was sorry to declare that she couldn't find anyone of that name either there or in any of their branches. Professor Gaitonde thanked the girl politely and came out of the Forbes building. He did not worry much where to stay. His main concern was to make his way to the library of the Asiatic Society to solve the riddle of history. He took a quick lunch at a restaurant and made his way to the town hall library. He entered the reading room and asked for a list of history books, including his own. The 5 volumes of his history book duly arrived on his table. He started from the beginning. Volume 1 took the history up to the period of Ashoka. Volume 2 up to Samudragupta. Volume 3 up to Muhammad Ghori. And Volume 4 up to the death of Aurangzeb. Up to this period, history was as he knew it. The change clearly had occurred in the last volume. Going through volume 5 from both ends inwards, Gangadhar Pant finally came to the precise moment where history had taken a different turn. That page in the book described the Battle of Panipat, and it mentioned that the Marathas won it handsomely. Ahmad Shah Abdali was defeated and he was chased back to Kabul by the victorious and successful Maratha army led by Sadashivrao Bhau, known as famous as Bahu Sahib, and his nephew, the young Vishwas Rao. Here you should again remember that in fact the Marathas were defeated in the battle, and Gangadhar Pant was trying to trace how the East India Company had existed even after 1857, and his mind was still working on that very track. The book did not go into a detailed account of the battle itself. Rather, it explained in detail the results or the consequences for the power struggle in India. Gangadhar Pant read through the account avidly, and the style of writing was unmistakably his. Yet, he thought that he was reading the detail of the battle for the first time, and this created a sort of doubt in his mind. Now, turning on to page number 63 of the textbook. Now, it established the supremacy of Marathas in northern India. The East India Company, which had been watching these developments, temporarily suspended its expansionist program. That is, after the victory in the Battle of Panipat by the Marathas. For the Peshwas, the immediate result was an increase in the influence of Bahu Sahib and Vishwas Rao, who eventually succeeded his father in 1780 AD. Now remember that the Peshwas were the rulers of the territory of Pune. In actual fact, both of them, that is, Bahu Sahib and Vishwas Rao, were killed in the Battle of Panipat in 1761. The East India Company was no match for the new Maratha ruler Vishwas Rao. The company was reduced to pockets of influence near Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. Now Gangadhar Pant's mind is still going through his own volumes. For political reasons, the Peshwas kept Mughal regime alive in Delhi. In the 19th century, These rulers from Pune, that's the Peshwas, recognized the importance of the technological age and set up their own centers for science and technology. The East India Company saw another opportunity to extend its influence. It offered aid and expertise. They were accepted only to make the local centers self-sufficient. The 20th century brought about further changes. India moved towards democracy. By then, the Peshwas were gradually replaced by democratically elected bodies. It was a country that had not been subjected to slavery of the white men, that is, the English. It had learned to stand on its feet and knew that what self-respect or dignity was. For purely commercial reasons, it had allowed the British to retain Bombay as their sole outpost in India. That lease was to expire in the year 2001 according to a treaty of 1908. Gangadhar Pant could not help comparing the country he knew, that is the country as it really was, with what he was witnessing around him, that is the country he was seeing through his mind. But at the same time, he felt that his investigations were incomplete. How did the Marathas win the battle? To find the answer, he must look for accounts of the battle itself. He went through the books and journals before him. At last, among the books, he found one that gave him the clue. It was Bhausai Banchi Bakhar, a book by a historian of his name. Although he seldom relied on the Bakhars for historical evidence, he found them entertaining to read. He found there a 3-line account of how close Vishwasrao had come to being killed. The actual lines in the book are, and then Vishwasrao guided his horse to the melee where the elite troops were fighting and he attacked them. And God was merciful. A shot brushed past his ear. Even the difference of a till sisam would have led to his death. The reader should again remember that this is only what Gangadhar is experiencing in his mind. Perhaps Professor Gaitonde had read such an account of the battle in some real book of history also. But here there is no mention of how the battle ended. It was only a catastrophic point in the battle that could turn the course of the battle anyway. At 8 o'clock, the librarian politely reminded the professor that the library was closing for the day. Gangadhar Pant emerged from his thoughts. Looking around, he noticed that he was the only reader left in the magnificent hall. I beg your pardon, sir. May I request you to keep these books here for my use tomorrow morning? By the way, when do you open? Gangadhar asked the librarian. The librarian smiled and replied that the library opened at 8 o'clock. There was a user and research right after his heart. As the professor left the table, he shoved some notes into his right pocket. Absent-mindedly, he also shoved the Bakhar into his left pocket. Again, remember that it was only what Professor Gaitonde was experiencing in his mind. It was only due to the collision that had that had taken place, and he was injured in the accident, and that left him unconscious. He found a guest house to stay in and had a simple meal. He then set out for a stroll towards the Azad Maidan. In the Maidan, in the Azad Maidan, he found a crowd moving towards a pandal. So a lecture was to take place. Force of habit took Professor Gaitonde towards the pandal. The lecture was in progress, although people kept coming and going. But Professor Gaitonde was not looking at the audience. He was staring at the platform as if mesmerized. There was a table and a chair, but the chair was unoccupied, that's empty. No one was sitting on the chair. The presidential chair unoccupied. Like a piece of iron attracted to a magnet, he swiftly moved towards the chair. Remember again that all the happenings are taking place in Professor Gaitonde's mind only. The speaker stopped in mid-sentence and he was too shocked to continue. The audience started shouting. They were shouting at Professor Gaitonde. Vacate the chair. Away from the platform, mister. These were the cries coming from the cries and shouts coming from the audience. What nonsense! Who ever heard of a public lecture without chairperson? Professor Gaitonde went to the mic and gave vent to his views. Ladies and gentlemen, an unchaired lecture is like Shakespeare's Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. Let me tell you. Here he pauses because he is stopped by the audience, as the audience was in no mood to listen. But Gangadhar Pant had the experience of speaking at 999 meetings and had faced the most hostile audience. He kept on talking. He soon became a target for a shower of tomatoes, eggs, and other objects. It means that tomatoes, eggs, and other objects, whichever the audience found, were thrown at Gangadhar Pant Gaitonde. But despite these hurling of these tomatoes, eggs, and other objects at him, he kept on speaking. He did not stop. Finally, the audience swarmed to the stage to eject him boldly. And in the crowd, Gangadhar Pant was nowhere to be seen. Now, Professor Gaitonde goes to his friend Rajendra Deshpande, who is a mathematician, and tells him his story of the Azad Maidan. And he tells him that's all I have to tell. Rajendra, all I know is that I was found in the Azad Maidan in the morning, but I was back in the world I am familiar with. Now, where exactly did I spend those 2 days when I was absent from here? So he sought an explanation from his friend Rajendra Deshpande, the mathematician. While Professor Gaitonde was roaming about the Azad Maidan, he was experiencing a different world mentally. He was hit by a truck and remained unconscious till he was found in the morning. When he came to himself, he asked Rajendra where exactly he had been for those 2 days. Rajendra tried to explain all the mental itinerary of Professor Gaitonde in a scientific manner. He said that it was just an enlargement of the thought he had in his mind prior to the accident. But then the professor produced the torn page of a book that had been found in his pocket. He said, I had inadvertently slipped the book in my pocket as I left the library. I discovered my error when I was paying for my meal. I had intended to return it the next morning, but it seems that in the melee of Azad Maidan, the book was lost. Only this torn up page remained, and luckily for me, the page contains vital evidence. Rajendra again read the page. It described how Vishwasrao narrowly missed the bullet, and how that event, taken as an omen by the Maratha army, turned the tide in their favor. Now look at this. Gangadhar Pant produced his own copy of Bahasa Banchi Bakar, opened at the relevant page. The account ran thus. And then Vishwasrao guided his horse to the melee where the elite troops were fighting, and he attacked them. And God expressed his displeasure. He was hit by the bullet. Now, the question arises, where did the printed paper in Professor Gaitonde's pocket come from? There could be no scientific explanation to it. The story writer has not tried to resolve this question, but Rajendra explained that he would try to rationalize his experience on the basis of two scientific theories as known today. And these theories are a catastrophic experience and the lack of determinism in quantum theory. According to the catastrophe theory, small changes in circumstances lead to sudden shifts in behavior. At the time of the accident, Professor Gaitonde was thinking about the Battle of Panipat. He was wondering what course history would have taken if the result of the battle had gone the other way. The neurons in his brain acted as a trigger, and the transition took place. He really began to believe that the Marathas had won the war. He retraced the whole history on the basis of this transition. And the transition took place as a result of the interaction of the neurons in his brain. They acted as a trigger, and the mind started working on a different track. This was the explanation given by Rajendra to Professor Gaitonde on the basis of catastrophe theory. The another explanation that could be possible, as told by Rajendra, was the lack of determinism in quantum theory. According to the lack of determinism in quantum theory, a man, while living in the present, can experience a number of different worlds, but only one at a time. Rajendra explains this by giving the example of an electron. If an electron is fired from a source, it can be in many different states. We can't determine its exact state by any scientific law. But at one given time, it can be only in one state where it has been observed. In the same way, the human mind can be in any number of different worlds. That is, in the present, human mind can experience a number of different worlds, but only one at a time. This was the explanation on the basis of the lack of determinism in quantum theory.